Hello everyone, Iván Markman. I'm an investor, advisor, board member at Self. If you want to learn more about Self, it's a very mysterious company. I can tell you afterwards. And I'm proud and grateful to partner with Sideporch in supporting climate companies. And I'm super excited about this conversation. So I'm going to jump right into it. Works, there we go. And before we get going, I wanted to frame the problem. I think many of us live in it, and I talked about earlier today, LA. If we zoom out, the economic size of the problem has 10x'd over the last 10 years. So if you look at that period, it went from 20 billion annually to about 200 billion in the last 2 full years that we're recording. And depending on how you count on it, it could be apples and oranges, but LA alone was 300 billion this year. So the problem has 10x, but when we think about innovation, it's clearly insufficient. And we have some stats here on that front. If we only look at the bucket of climate investments, adaptation and resilience accounts for 3 to 5% of investments, about 12% of the startups. And if you compare that to a series of frameworks that have been put out there in terms of what's needed, it's less than 10%. So clearly we have a problem here, and that's why I'm excited, because all of these people here are solving it. And that's the opportunity. You know, how do we create more innovation? And in our discussion in the morning, we're talking about we can't do things the same way that we're doing it. We need to do things differently. We need to use every tool that we have in our hands to move faster, cheaper, more accessible, more permeable, etc., more resilient. And then also, relatingly, how do we unlock more capital into innovation, more of the right capital into the right innovations yesterday. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Is that cool? Okay? Yeah? All right. Okay, so we have an amazing panel. We're going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, say who you are, what you do, and one thing that you learned about the LA fires. I'm going to kick off what I learned personally with the LA fires, which was the incredible power of networks. You know, even today when we were talking earlier about all of the different people that need to come together from all walks of life, from all specialization, orientation, etc., to solve this problem, I was just amazed to see all of these different groups of people coming together and activating solutions, comparing notes on how we get this done, how we crack it open. So with that, I'm going to start with Sasha, and we'll go in this direction. And please say what you do and one thing you learned about the fires.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here today. About Cosmic Buildings. I'm the CEO and founder of a San Francisco-based company that does innovation in the space of industrialized construction. I grew up in Croatia, and at age of 10, I was forced to leave my house and build a life with my family in a completely different place. And that really experience kind of led me into lifelong vision to build a better way to build homes that are sustainable and affordable to everyone. After spending 15 years in intersection between construction, robotics, and architecture, I decided to start Cosmic. Essentially, what we do, we're designing construction from the first principles by building mobile robotic factories that can be shipped to the site or close to the site and build components directly where it's needed, just in time. And because of this, we can build homes that are fire resistant and sustainable, 3 times faster and 30% cheaper in comparing to some conventional and even some prefab companies. We are right now working on 30 projects in Palisade and Altadena. And we will be deploying our first factory within the next couple of months in Palisade.
Thank you. So maybe first to start, just thank you again to the Crosscut team. So coming from DBL Partners, we're a venture capital fund based in San Francisco. We've had a chance to co-invest with the Crosscut team, and despite what every VC will tell you, where every company goes up and to the right, that's not always the case in our portfolios. And we even had one or two that wasn't the case together with Crosscut, which was fantastic partners. And I think everyone here knows been hard times for the true color shine. And then quickly to say as well, thank you to the Sideporch team. So we're involved on the board of RAIN, and I was the phone call to Shaun, I want to say on maybe a Tuesday, which then he had a call with the CEO of our company on a Wednesday, and Kristen was down there driving from LA on a Friday, and what they said is an understatement of the amount of support given, which is, if you go back to the old stories of entrepreneurs sleeping on the factory floor, this is a consultant who met a team about 3 days prior, quite literally sleeping 24/7 and giving it all on an absolutely critical project. So just to say the type of partners we have, really, really incredible from that Sideporch team. So DBL, so we are a $600 million venture capital fund, been around for about 20 years, and the way that we invest is really at the intersection of sustainability, impact, and driving change. And I'd say the way to think about us, and what double bottom line partners, DBL stands for, is the idea of no compromise. So to your point on it, how do we build things that are better, faster, cheaper? Maybe they follow a compute pattern like Moore's Law, maybe a manufacturing pattern like Wright's Law, and deliver social and environmental benefits. So the interesting thing that brings me here today is early investments in electrification of vehicles, in food and agriculture, and so many of these other sectors where we see playing a role, has now led to looking at things like wildfire technology with that same paradigm. And then in terms of, I think, sort of one fact and something I learned is, I'll ask the question, as we talk about rebuilding, in cities rebuilding, how many people here know where the word skyscraper comes from when it was brought about? Not a lot of hands. So most people probably though know of the 1871 Chicago fire, where about 1/3 of that city, the most destructive wildfire in US history, lost their homes. The brick and steel buildings that were built after that were the first skyscrapers. Even a little bit less known, in 1888, not too far after, there were massive snowstorms that hit Boston and New York. A few years later, the modern subway system was developed. So some of these things that we take for granted today as true technological innovations, they're part and parcel of our world, maybe less so the subway here, but are absolutely the type of things where coming out of crisis, how you build back smarter and better can lead to really, really meaningful change.
I'm Sam Ruben, co-founder and chief business officer for HyWatts. Though actually wear a lot of different hats that are connected to resilience and rebuilding. Previously was a co-founder of Mighty Buildings, who analyzed construction before stepping back into an advisory role to focus on embodied carbon policy, including builds here in California and work with the World Economic Forum. I'm also a member of the steering committee for Building Green's California Housing Innovators System Network, which is really looking to figure out how do we reimagine the housing system so it actually works for everyone. Really bringing in a lot of the voices that have historically been excluded. It's a critical part of the community engagement element of the rebuild here. And then I'm also a co-founder of BuildTech VC, which is an early stage construction technology focused angel ecosystem, where most of the companies we're investing in are at that intersection of the built environment and climate tech. But mainly here wearing my hats. And so what we do at HyWatts is our first product is what we call a power plant in a box, which combines on-site renewable energy generation with our proprietary hydrogen energy conversion technology to allow for EV charging stations, data centers, residential communities, other power-intensive infrastructure to be deployed, given the fact that we simply don't have the grid capacity support it in, well, almost anything. And so essentially it works during the day, solar generating energy goes to the chargers in the home of the data center. At night, during the rainy season, the hydrogen is then converted into electricity to ensure uninterrupted, continuous operation with the low capex. We can deliver electricity for 9 cents per kilowatt hour, and we can deploy systems at roughly about half the cost of an equivalent lithium-ion system, including being able to use non-potable water, much smaller footprint, a lot of advantages in that regard. And so really focused on how do we create a resilient energy system that meets the needs of our growing community, needs of electrification, decarbonization, all the above. And so for me, something that really, when I was kind of thinking about what lesson I learned from the fires, and for me, disaster response has been really important for me on the age. I was lucky enough to get to spend a few months in New Orleans after Katrina with the Red Cross, helping in the Lakeview neighborhood, which had 16 feet of water sitting in it for 3 weeks, gutting homes, providing goods and services for the community, supporting them with medical services, whatever they needed, as they figured out what does it look like to come back from this. And so for me, one thing is obviously the power of community is one of the biggest, I think, and the role that when community comes together, we can move mountains, and it erases so many divides. I think when I was in New Orleans, one of the things that really resonated with me and really stuck with me and has for 20 years since is the volunteers were at these sites, all ages, all backgrounds, all races, all religions, all political affiliations. None of that mattered, because it was all people coming together as people in order to engage with each other and to support them. Because that's really, for me, when humanity is at its best, is oftentimes when we're faced with that force, when we're forced to come together to support each other. And so for me, I think one of the biggest lessons really was that. On the business side, it's the fact that we just need distributed energy. I don't feel that's quite as bad.
Hi, my name is Caie. I'm one of the partners here at Lowercarbon Capital. It's a fund based out of LA and San Francisco, just over $2 billion under management, which we raised our first capital in 2021. We invest in 3 main themes at Lowercarbon, which is carbon removal, sucking carbon out of the atmosphere, climate mitigation and resilience, so anything that can be broadly thought of in this category of buying more time, and then decarbonization technologies that can reduce carbon as they're being produced, like green steel or green cement. I'll say in terms of things that I was thinking about is in the aftermath or immediate aftermath of having lived in LA for 4 years, but then also having been born in the Bay Area. And if you look at the map of the Cal Fire exposures of places where, places look like the Palisades, my hometown of Orinda is the second most exposed place in Northern California. And despite having grown up in all of these areas where there's a ton of wildfire risk, I found myself on the first night of the wildfire with basically 1 carton of a water bottle situation that I had thought of and no food in my fridge because I'm one of those crazy people who essentially lives day to day from a food perspective. And so the thought that I had was the worst time to start thinking about what to do in a disaster is the moment in which it happens. And despite the fact that I work in climate, I spend all my time thinking about resilient solutions and better ways to mitigate. It can be in practice really hard to think before in advance of these disasters happening of what you could do to have better resilience, how you could better mitigate against something that feels like an unthinkable problem. And so one of the things that I found really inspiring about the work that a lot of our companies that we invest in do is that they make that idea of how to mitigate against a natural disaster much more logical part of the way in which you live your life. We have an example of a company which we'll talk about later on the insurance side that marries mitigation with underwriting the insurance for a home. And those types of solutions that we spend a lot of time with looking at Lowercarbon make it much easier to opt into being prepared when I don't think it's a natural human instinct as much as we all care about climate and mitigation and resilience. It's not natural for us to necessarily think about those solutions until something like that is happening. And so I would say that's something that I'm both inspired by Lowercarbon and the work that we do, and also admitting my own shortcomings here as well.
How are we doing on time?
doing great.
So I apologize to all people standing over here. I'll try and do one of these. Shaun, Abrahamson, managing partner at Third Sphere. We invest, I would say at this point, about 40% of our portfolio is in adaptation and resilience. We have some unusual definitions of what that is. And then the rest is in essentially carbon or emissions mitigation. So a lot of that might look a little bit strange. We've seen the one-wheel skateboard. That was one of our first investments. A bunch of other stuff you should never have seen because it's things like electronics recycling, which most people, there's no reason you would ever have seen. I think maybe what makes us a little unusual is we invest super early. So our definition, in case you ever want to introduce someone to us, excellent team, terrible logo. We'll get into why logos are terrible for very technical teams. And probably the demo doesn't work consistently. That's our ideal stage. And definitely no customers. We'd like to know about who the customers could be, but revenue is not a requirement. And that's been pretty useful. I think what that has forced us to do is do sort of first principles. There's no pattern to match other than maybe what talent looks like. Knowing what a bad logo looks like is actually quite easy, and everyone can do it. And I think the main lesson probably from LA Fire was just a really hard reset. You know, when you work in venture capital, there's a bunch of ways that you can sort of tell if you're doing okay. People give you more money to invest, people come and tell you about their companies. But on the day, I really felt like a failure. I've been working on resilience and adaptation for 10 years. We have 0 things deployed in LA. Right? And by any metric, if I show you the companies, these are very successful companies, which gets back to Ivan's point, which is we've done some stuff. It is so far off in terms of the scale and the rates of change. And so I'm grateful to Shaun and the Sideporch team. Beyond the coffee and sort of getting everyone together, I think this is a critical step. We've sort of operated at an international scale. We have investments around the world at this point. And it feels actually kind of good to be able to meet people in LA and build things in LA, so I'm excited about that.
Thanks everyone, and thinking back to how do we massively accelerate innovation, how do we unlock capital? I want to start with the investors first. So I would love to know your perspective, how you describe your thesis, right? What in adaptation and resilience is investable from your perspective? And we can tee it up to also answer the question, we want more of X. We would like to see more companies doing X because we think that that's both aligned with how we think about deploying capital, but we also think that it's necessary and it's a good business. That's where the double bottom line comes into play. So whoever wants to pick it up first.
I can give a high level framing. I think the bigger picture of climate and sustainability is hopefully we all believe climate change is happening and want to do something about it, but you can't rely on people adopting solutions out of the pure goodness of their heart. It needs to make practical sense. And so I think resilience broadly falls in that same category, which is, can you offer a solution that for a homeowner or a landowner or a municipality, it makes sense to adopt that solution irrespective of any stated particular climate goal. A really simple example that Jake and I share on a investment is a company like BurnBot, which is a robotics, call it a firefighting robot in many different ways. And the reason that a CAL FIRE would adopt a solution like that is not necessarily because they have a particular climate mandate for using that solution, but because it makes a lot of sense to do preventative burns around communities and therefore help stop the spread of wildfire when they're occurring. And the robots can do that work faster and more effectively and safer without smoke as sort of a side effect of the work cheaper than the crews or the goats that are actually used today. And so that's a solution where you are getting that better, cheaper, faster mandate, and you're doing it because you want to prevent the destruction of homes, not because you're sort of hitting a particular target there.
Sure. I think that you nailed the head in terms of our investment thesis. Again, the best idea has always been around no compromise. And I'd say whether it be going back to the early days of electrification, right? The reason why we have so much solar deployed now, 90% of all new energy in the US last year was solar, wind, battery storage, a little bit of hydrogen, but green. And the reason for that is because it's the lowest cost of energy. So I think applying that to mitigation and thinking about for today, there's maybe two parts to it. I think one is you have to start with recognizing the problem even before getting to the solution and solution sets. And I think having a really clear-eyed view, and maybe what brings us here today, is thinking about catastrophic wildfire is the problem, right? And there are many, many things to go into the sort of underlying why behind that. And I'm specific in saying catastrophic wildfire is the problem. And it is not just fire in general, right? We just heard about the use of prescribed fire. There's been fire on the landscape. There's been all types of ecology. We heard about the diversity of ecology here in California. But if you unpack it, there is work that needs to be done. And the problem today, so 15 of the 20 largest fires, and the most destructive in California history, have happened in the last 10 years. There's no question that the problem is worse today than it was yesterday. There is also, if you look at any form of the climate science, or even you just look around and you see what's happened here, what happened in Lahaina last year, what happened in Paradise in 2018, what happened in the Marshall Fire in Colorado, that the problem is accelerating, right? And so just from a first principles basis, you have to say, we need new solutions. And being able to pinpoint technology and opportunities where you can deliver something at pace and scale that only comes around when you're offering something that's better, that's faster, that's cheaper, and it delivers on the social and environmental outcomes as well.
Can you provide an example?
Yeah, so maybe I can talk a little bit about rain. And so you heard about it from Kristen. So this is one where it's all on the response side of wildfires. And one of the things that is, just call it a matter of fact and somewhat painful, is there is a massive amount of investment that has gone into how we respond to things with Black Hawk helicopters or with drones or with all types of precision technology. Where that investment has gone is in fighting abroad, and it hasn't been spent on fighting one of the biggest climate risks that we have here at home, right? And so the company that Chris has been working with is basically leveraging $100 million in DARPA investment that's all around how do you take helicopters and automate them. And this is technology that exists today. There have been thousands of flight hours in the military context in saying, can we adopt that to help us on wildfires? Can we do that to be helpful in expanding the envelope when you could be doing an aerial helicopter response? At 2 a.m., when pilots are timing out and then going to sleep until the early morning, could you have an automated helicopter continue to fly at that time to give 24/7 aerial response? Could you have automated helicopters in remote regions and areas where it wouldn't make sense to normally staff a team? And it costs about $1 million a year to staff each one of these helicopters, if not more, it's a little more around here. Could you do that with automation and have a helicopter get there, not within 40 minutes or an hour and a half, but within 5 minutes, within 10 minutes? So that's the type of climate infrastructure and sort of real benefit of technology that we're looking for.
Thank you. Shaun, talk about your thesis and if there's one or two companies that haven't been invented yet or that you haven't seen that you would love to see out there.
Yes, I think our ideal framework for the world is that science fiction writers could talk directly to policy and insurance people, and we could just skip all the sort of prove it stuff. But since we haven't been able to figure that out, we look for the sort of science fiction, try and figure out if it's real. And then I think, in addition to the better, faster, and cheaper, we're really interested in if there is likely to be someone who has permission to buy something, probably on a credit card. So one of the challenges is so I'm not anti-institution before. I have lots of questions about how big institutions run, but I don't necessarily want someone to say I'm going to sell something to utilities. Actually, also, I'm not sure that we want utilities to buy experimental stuff, right? And so a lot of the questions for us is there a logical buyer who could show up, buy the first generation of this thing when everyone else thinks it's science fiction, prove that it can work so that other more conservative buyers can then show up and say, actually, it works. So we have a few examples. Again, hopefully things you've never heard of. I kind of like that as a thesis. There's a company called Near Space Labs. Controversially, they don't use rocket ships and they don't use drones. They fly at about 120,000 feet using weather balloons, and it is the cheapest, fastest way to get high resolution, high frequency imaging. And that was super interesting, but the way into the market for them is they need the insurance industry that is buying very specific types of before and after data to make their business viable. So it took them a while, but they figured it out. They didn't start with DoD for a bunch of reasons, but it actually turned out to be faster. I think maybe the other interesting example is we have a construction of rides company that automatically builds rebar cages. Again, why? Well, it turns out a lot of the resilience discussion we're having, there are going to be a lot of interesting nature-based solutions. We often haven't been able to figure out what the business model is for that, but we do know we're going to build a lot of hard infrastructure, right? So the roads and the things that we sort of pass by all the time and don't notice, that stuff, we are terrible at building that. We are so slow, and it is so expensive. And we go to the subway in LA, but it's not that we are bad. It's that literally the productivity in construction hasn't changed much since the Second World War. It's kind of insane. So I think the last thing I'll say is this is the best excuse. Resilience and adaptation is the best excuse to just be actually a lot of the things that we do are dumb and slow. Right? Someone should show up and say, why are we doing it this way? And that's what founders are phenomenal at. So I don't have necessarily, and this is because we lazy investors, a specific company that I want built. But I do love that we at least have sufficient number of founders who show up and say, actually, mental health is the thing that you have not thought about in resilience and adaptation. You can't actually afford to have people give up. Right? And there are a lot of people who are completely overwhelmed by the scale. When we talk about 10x, 10x is not a thing that we compute very well. It causes most folks to just be hey, I should probably just go on a vacation and binge my way through Vita and not worry about this because it's too hard. And that's actually not helpful. So what I'd like to see is just more folks showing up and saying, hey, current system is kind of dumb. We have a 10x better solution. I would love to hear what that is.
Awesome. Let's switch it to the founder side. Folks doing the hard work to crack this open. And what I'd like to know, Sam, is two things. The first one is what inspired your teams to focus on this problem versus, a zillion other things that you do. And then the second one is what needs to change the most for HyWatts to be everywhere, right? What are the few things that you would like to see be different so that, adoption can be massive?
So my co-founder, CEO, previously founded the company HyPoint, which developed high-temperature, lightweight fuel cells for aviation, and before selling to Zero Avia for $100 million in 2022. And so we used some of that money to buy a townhouse in Danville, California, in the East Bay, Northern California. And he's originally from Russia. It was his first time paying his own electricity bills in California. And his understanding of California is, California's got a green grid. Green electricity is cheap, so it should be cheap. And then he looked at his bill and realized he was paying 45 cents per kilowatt hour. And he's like, wait, solar's like 4 cents per kilowatt hour. What am I paying for? And so he looked at the bill. He's like, why is over 50% of my bill going to transmission and distribution of energy? Why? That's silly. Why are we trying to move this everywhere instead of creating it where we need it? And so that's what really inspired him to start HyWatts, was the idea that, well, he's already has this incredible experience with high temperature technology, which is kind of the next generation of proton exchange membrane. That creates additional efficiencies from higher temperatures, much simpler and less complex balance of plant, whole host of benefits. And he was like, well, what if I took this idea and used it for the ground? And so I originally connected with him actually about a month after the company incorporated, and was introduced to him through one of my co-founders of BuildTech, who'd been an investor in HighPoint. And I was blown away, both by the incredible potential of technology to accelerate carbonization of the economy, particularly in a moment where we're seeing rapid electrification, whether that's data centers creating additional demand electrification, residential and commercial buildings, the rise of EVs, all of this. But even more so, by Alex and the team's experience in bringing this kind of technology to market successfully. So I stepped in originally as an advisor, and I think the second angel check, before I somehow let myself get talked back into the chaos of early stage founder life. Turns out I missed it. And so that's kind of the genesis, but it's really for me, what made me decide to step in was I've been doing angel investing and advising a number of companies, all of which are doing incredible work. But of all of them, HyWatts was one that had the most potential for real impact at scale and on a timeline that matters. Because I basically operate from the lens that the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has made it clear. Well, I used to say 5, maybe 10, now I say maybe 5 years to more or less change everything. And we saw during the lockdowns that if we really want to, as a society, we can do what's necessary. We can make the sacrifices. We can make the changes that can set us on a better course. The problem is we lack the leadership. And this is globally, this isn't any one country. We don't have the leaders we need for this moment to inspire that sacrifice, to inspire that change, to bring people together, to take those steps. And so that means we need to make the right choice, the easy choice. Humans are creatures of convenience. And therefore, we need to go upstream. We need to make it so they're doing the right thing without even thinking about it, just by turning on the lights. And so that, for me, was what inspired me to step in with HyWatts. And where, for us, it's really hoping to unlock is this idea of why, instead of looking at the energy system like we're in the 20th century, where we centralize everything and then ship it out from there, what if we really embrace the fact that we have these amazing new technologies that are really well suited to distributed production? We have solar, we have wind, we have geothermal, we have all these different new energy sources that are best used where they're needed and not created somewhere else and moved where you can have efficiency losses, increased cost from transmission, and all of that. And so that's really, for me, what inspired me to step in as a founder of HyWatts. And for me, it's similar to what the investors are saying. We're also focused on making the right choice from a business standpoint. Our whole focus has been on how do we create the lowest cost solution on the market. Full stop. No subsidies, no incentives. The decarbonization obviously is very important, but that's only matters if it makes business sense. And so that's what we've really been focusing on, and are already going to market with our first pilot here in LA this summer to support fleet charging in Ruben. We've got another project that we're close to finalizing to help develop a off-grid community in Central Valley, because they're looking at a 7-year grid interconnection timeline to PG&E and 45 cents per kilowatt. We're going to give it to them for 9, at about half the cost of lithium. So I see a critical role, but again, it comes down to how do you balance the needs of people, planet, and prosperity, and not maximizing anyone, because if you only have 2 or 3, you're not meeting those goals. It's really how do you bring all that, and to really unlock it for us, we're starting to see accelerating traction, initially focusing on the EV charging space, because that's an area, as Shaun was pointing to, utilities are great, but their idea of innovation is tier out 9. Like they want something that's commercial. Their idea of innovation is a commercial ready product they haven't tried. Whereas we're still like tier L6. So EV charging, awesome space because there's a need for new technology. There's an embrace of new technology. There's an acceptance of trying things differently in order to get that advantage. And so that's been an area we've got a lot of opportunities. And then we're seeing crisis in energy for residential communities. I mean, data centers a year ago, that was gonna be a 3-year journey because they were similar to utilities. Because of the power crunch, they're now looking to new technology in a way that they weren't even just 6 months ago. So honestly, a lot of the headwinds are already shifting to get to the point where HyWatts can really be everywhere. But for us, it's a matter of continuing to move down the path that we're on, continuing to develop the system, optimize it, and then scale. Okay, it's that scaling that's I think we're going to be one of the critical areas, particularly with the shift away from federal funding for scaling and deployment of climate tech.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that point on scaling and do a quick lightning round on that. Sasha, can you talk about what inspired you and again, what you're already on 30 projects here. How about we add 2 zeros there, or 3 zeros? What would need to be true?
Yeah, I think our team is super inspired right now with the timing we live in. There's obviously a need for building more. Not just forgetting about LA for a second. I think the housing crisis has been with us for a really long time, and billions of dollars have been investing in the space. And one thing I think what for us, I think recognizing that this is the right time to start building the robotic system that can actually replicate the way how the best home builder does custom home. So bringing in all those advancements in AI that basically can teach you over to bring that level of craftsmanship. It's something that it's really we feel like it's just this close. And so I think for us, I think just going back on design and build service that we are right now providing to our customers, and talking about better, faster, cheaper. We know as a humanity, we know how to design something good, right? We right now have in Bellside, tier 1 architects designing single-family homes, and they know how to do it. I think what we don't know as a society, as an industry, is how to build those homes faster and cheaper. And so I think that's where we come as a company, really with this idea of mobility, right? And I think we can speak about the whole construction industry as traditional and all of the issues that they have. But I would center it as a labor. I think the labor is the biggest issue, right? If we have enough people to build one home, we will build it. But right now, there's no those people. Like we have right now missing 10 million workers in the construction industry, and over the next 3 to 4 or 5 years, 30% of the existing labor is going to retire. So it's we're approaching a disaster more than this one. And so I think it is something that we're really obsessed about. And then second, I think about the prefab industrialized construction. Obviously, we need prefab companies, but there's a lot of limitation there. There's simply you cannot solve the logistic issue with the prefab factory and having a permanent factory, right? There's a 300 miles limitation, and then communication between the factory and the site becomes really hard. So I think we kind of merge those two components, labor and the logistics, in what we try to do. And it's basically a mobile robotic factory that can be shipped anywhere. And of course, it can build without human involved. And one thing also about the timing, what we actually right now use a robot that is retired from the car industry, and we paid it $20,000. Retired, yeah. It's basically retired robotic arm that we teach how to build building components, leveraging AI and custom ripping system.
By the way, as a quick aside, you two should connect later because Shaun does something with retired cars.
Right.
So there's a common thread there. I mean, all of you should ask about lemons. Yeah.
So the last part is the last part is low cost, right? Like the cost of our mobile robotic factory is just ridiculously cheap. And so I think something what you asked about the question, I know you're tight on time. Just want to speak fast. I think what really unlocks the next generation of the construction factory like ours is simply it's working right now. It's just our ability to raise money and build those factories.
Yeah, that's awesome. And related to that point, and scaling, you talked about scaling as well. I would say here we have investors who are typically at the earlier stages, early to growth stages of some of these businesses. So this morning, Abby Ross talked about this Delta Fund, which is a very creative way to ensure that construction and reconstruction and rebuilding is made in a way that enables for greater resilience. It's also very creative from a financial structuring perspective and allocating and pricing risk. You mentioned the need for capital to go and scale. You talked about scaling and the cycle. So I'm going to ask investors real quick, what is your capital not good for? And what are those pools of capital where there's opportunity, where maybe you see gaps, right? Where it's like, hey, particularly in resilience and adaptation, where are the gaps? Where do you see some of the gaps in capital that once again would allow us to more massively scale? Anyone?
You want to start earliest stage to?
Sure, I'll do early. So, mostly I think our capital is good for paying people. I don't want to discriminate against retired robots, but it is mainly for paying people. And then maybe getting like the first prototype built, but actually we push a lot of our teams to get customers to pay for stuff. It turns out like if you want to know if someone really likes something, ask them to give you money. And so I think like that's the main thing. I think our capital is really bad for buying things, buying assets, funding projects, building factories. And so we've actually spent a bunch of time just trying to map out who those other folks are. I guess the good news is the insurance industry actually is feeding the boom in private credit, which is the thing that actually funds a lot of the things that we would fund. So maybe we get like a circular reference. I'm not sure if that's like an error or a good thing, but
we need to improve recycling, that circular reference. Okay.
I think I'll talk to the growth side of the fund because Lowercarbon is an early stage fund, but we also invest at the Series B and C. I think at that stage, call it like a couple years into your development, you've raised from early stage investors. What we want to see is that if we give you whatever, $10, $20 million, you can 5 to 10x that. And the question is less, can we make the technology work? Is there a buyer at that point? But if you gave us X incremental amount of dollars, we could then push that technology into as many homes as possible. So it's a question of go to market and scale from a rinse and repeat perspective rather than an initial test of we have an inkling that this might be our first buyer, at least the growth stage.
So we're probably a little bit between the two, where we do some earlier stage and some growth. And I'd say our investment is to get to the next set of milestones to make you this transformative company. So where our capital is not good is where we can unlock much lower cost of capital, right? You don't need venture dollars to finance a massive factory or facility or project development financing. You might need it to de-risk the technology. You might need it to build a team. You might need it to go to market, to sell your product. You might also not even need the capital, but need a partner that can help you build a business and think about those 6 chess moves ahead, can help bring together policy, bring together other elements beyond just being a check that goes in as well too.
Excellent, thank you. So quick lightning round before we move into questions. One win that you've had in this space in the last 12 months that gives you hope.
Yeah, we went from concept to full production in 12 months. And so we're right now, working on 6 projects in the Bay Area and have more than 40 in down payments from aside from LA. We have 30 projects here. So I think there's a couple of wins, but I think it's really that fast-paced transition between the idea to full production.
That's awesome. Let's celebrate the wins.
I'll be quick, but give 2. So I'll say one is, so on this vegetation management and prevention side that I talked about, seeing a project that's coming together and happening right now, and it's something that I say specifically for everyone in LA to be thinking about. So in Incline Village, they're breaking ground on this idea of a halo of protection. So this is essentially a fire break and fuel removal around the entire city of Incline Village. I know a lot of people have transportation that we've up there, and I'd say that is the exact example of sort of public-private partnership in the only enabled by this company, Burnbot, is bringing down the cost to be able to do that work and then put very, very safe prescribed fire on the ground. The other quick one I'll give is on the policy side. So as you can imagine, working on autonomous helicopters isn't just sort of simple, go find a few dollars from the government to do it. And a lot of times it requires true political leadership. For those of you in Orange County, you have an assembly member, Caie, who had heard about this technology in sort of November and December. About 2 weeks after the fires here, she put forward a bill. And as of 2 days ago, that bill went to the first committee hearing, 7-0 in California, completely bipartisan. So just to say, there is true leadership in this state around basically investing in some of the sector.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'd say our biggest win was completing and deploying our system MVP to the Plug and Play Technology Center in Sunnyvale. In early February, we've already completed over 100 hours of charging of EVs, completely grid autonomous, only powered by our system. Both there, but we've also hauled it over the Rockies to the NREL Industry Go Forum the other week in Denver. So we also have getting really good field data, both from Operation Sunnyvale, Operation Denver, all that's both validation of the technology and our approach, but also critically field data that allows us to continue to optimize and move forward to the next iteration, such as our commercial pilot this summer here in LA.
That's amazing. Congrats.
Okay, really quickly, we have a company that is putting boxes on telephone poles and using vibration to essentially tell the health of the telephone pole. People probably think about utilities in the relation of wildfire, particularly in Altadena. And what happens is if a tree is sitting and leaning against a telephone pole for more than 4 to 6 hours, that will normally be the amount of length of time that it causes to create a spark that can then create a wildfire. So we've obviously probably thought about this in the causes of various wildfires over the last couple of years in California. One fun fact to leave you with is last year there were 8 instances in Northern California where this company has rolled out, where a tree or a branch was leaning against a utility and the company's technology triggered a circuit breaker to turn off the wildfire. The estimated retroactive look at those wildfires is that it would have cost on average a $200 million damage in the number of homes. So we're focusing a lot today naturally on the wildfires that have occurred, but to say that there's technology that is rolling out and throughout California that is already preventing an enormous amount of damage to our homes, and I think we'll continue to hopefully see that kind of change going forward. So good wins.
That's an awesome win.
We're not supposed to have like favorite children. So I'll pick one that's like a conceptual win, which is generally when you invest in climate, you sort of try to categorize things into either adaptation, resilience, or mitigation. And so when things are really good, both of those things happen at the same time. So we have a company that is building a full stack, or they have built a full stack electric trucking company, growing super fast. The reason it works is that they already beat diesel in about 50% of the bids, right? So going up and down Highway 5, for example, they can be cheaper than most diesel trucks. But it turns out the thing that makes them much cheaper is they can be a backup power supply in peak events. And that is going to make it impossible for diesel to compete with them. So those are the virtuous things you get when you are really just lucky. I hope for more of those.
Fantastic. All right, if you were with us last year, you saw this crazy technique to get us to the next thing in the agenda. So I'm going to ask for a bunch of questions. Anyone that has questions, we're going to hear them until I get yanked off, and then we're going to pull the next person up. But these are the questions that are going to carry us outside to start having conversations. So, questions, sir?
Forward investor question.
And this is questions, not comments. Question time, we do comments over beer and other drinks later.
Talked about energy a lot, and so for the investors in the room, I'm sure all of you guys have either read or seen Carlisle white paper about the new dual order and the transition of the energy transition being forced to adapt to a driver of energy security and self-sufficiency as opposed to the past 10 years aligned with net zero agreements or Paris Agreement. I'm curious, how do you guys score that with your thesis around adaptation and resilience? Do you agree with this, or how are you thinking about that moving forward?
Thank you very much. Next question.
I'm curious if you folks do diverse forms of funding and finance beyond just straight venture equity, venture debt, if you look at diverse forms of exits, et cetera.
Look at capital across the capital sector. Yes, ma'am. I know you're a professor, so bring it.
I'm not a professor, but am teacher by trade. So the current administration is slashing scientific funding, which means that research will no longer be able to create the technology that we can then build scalable tech off of. How do you see investors filling this gap for founders who have ideas but don't have the funding they need to create the research and design for their ideas?
New gaps emerging by the moment now. How do we help? Next question.
For the investors and founders, what new problem that has emerged from these LA wildfires, what new problem do you see that is yet to be solved?
Thank you very much. Zoe, you can bring it. Let the cloud you're cracking.
For investors, because of the way that the administration is changing state funding, are you changing the language that you're using in describing your investment theses?
Thank you. And the two more. We're going to move to the front. Yes.
What do you get more money to female founders?
How do we get more money to female founders?
Are you aware of how your work is connected to the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals?
Right on Sustainable Development Goals. Last one. You know what, David.
Where are we with air sequestration? Climate change, where do we need that sequestration?
Right on, so sequestration. Thank you, and thank you to the panel.